Hi, everybody. We just want to welcome you. This is our Tapping Out of Trauma biannual webinar, and we get to do these to really just be of service to the tapping community, especially with regard to the topic of working with individuals who've had trauma, working with practitioners who work with people who've had trauma. And so it really is our pleasure to be able to offer this to you. So the title of today is Practice and Integrity, Risk Management Strategies for EFT and Tapping Practitioners. And we have with us Midge Murphy. And I'm sure many of you who know who Midge is, but not everybody does. So of course, we're going to begin with a little bit of introduction. I myself am Craig Wiener, and of course, my partner, Suzanne Fagel, and we run Tapping Out of Trauma. But let me just go ahead and introduce Midge. And we're going to be talking really with a focus for tapping practitioners and for legal risk management insights into maintaining a healthy, viable, thriving practice and dealing with some of the issues that come up. So a little bit about Midge. So Midge is the first attorney to receive her PhD in energy medicine from Hollis University. She attends both she understands both the law and alternative healing arts. That allows her to lend her practices as a bridge between those two worlds, which is really important. So while Midge no longer actually practices law, she does offer professional liability risk management services, consulting services, and for over a decade, she's empowered both beginner and expert EFT and tapping practitioners to practice legally and ethically, critically important. She's a recognized dynamic presenter, teacher, leading expert on ethics, on legal principles, risk management strategies, and the practice of energy healing methods in the fields of energy medicine and energy psychology, and why we have her here. Suzanne, would you like to add?
Yeah. Yes, she is also the author of Practice Energy Healing in Integrity, The Joy of Offering Your Gifts Legally and Ethically, and second book, Ethics, Legal Issues, and Risk Management Strategies for EFT Practitioners, which I can personally recommend. Midge has an energy healing practice for animals and humans, and she's trained in therapeutic touch. She's a Reiki master, a certified matrix energetics practitioner, and she's been a student of shamanism for over 20 years and uses shamanic practices in her healing work. So what an incredible gift basket for us. So thank you, Midge. We're really happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin. You're welcome. So we'd like maybe to start with asking you to offer us some insights as to how you came to this unique nexus of combining your legal background and energy medicine.
That's a good question because it kind of feels really odd, doesn't it? But it really started with being introduced to Carolyn Mace's work and reading Anatomy of the Spirit. And that really intrigued me. And I had the opportunity then to attend a number of workshops that she was doing back then with Norm Shealy on the science of intuition. And through that process, I had the opportunity to pursue a PhD in energy medicine with Norm Shealy being the head of my dissertation committee. And I was just really strongly guided to do it. That's the best way I can explain it. Because to me, it seemed weird, even to me. It's like, I'm a lawyer. What am I doing going studying energy medicine? And I didn't know why I was doing it. I just felt really compelled and strongly driven through intuition and just my own heart that this is where I needed to be. So I went through the PhD program and earned my degree. And then I didn't really know what to do with it. And then, of course, synchronistic events happened, and one of my colleagues who I had gone through the PhD program together with was Francesca McCartney, who has run the Academy of Intuition Medicine in Sausalito for probably close to 30 years now, a long time. And she approached me and said, you know, we have this 2-year program. We train our students in intuition medicine. Would you be willing to put together a course on ethics and legal issues in the practice of intuition medicine? And I thought, well, okay, I could do that. That sounds like a good idea. That's a good mix of my background in law as well as being an energy healing practitioner myself with this degree. So that kind of started the pathway for me to sort of combine these two worlds, a logical linear world of business and law, and the right brain intuitive world of energy healing.
Mhm.
And I think what I've noticed over the years is that, first of all, there's a vacuum. There's no one, and I've been doing this for over a decade, that no one's really addressing the legal and risk management issues of being in a practice with an innovative, any kind of innovative energy-oriented therapies or techniques to the public. And that this is really a critical component that's missing, that my background in training and expertise can provide as a service to moving forward the entire field. So at some point, energy medicine will be completely accepted, energy psychology, EFT will be completely accepted into the mainstream healthcare field. So I think that's where it sort of brought me into this place. And then, you know, writing the books and teaching and doing courses and doing a lot of consulting with practitioners all over the country over the last decade. I'm still seeing that there's a big need for people to be educated about the whole world of the legalities of having a practice, what risk management strategies you can implement to lower your risk, because I'm not about creating fear, but about empowering my clients to feel comfortable and ready to move out into the world so they can do their healing work without that dark cloud of going, oh, am I going to get myself into trouble? So that's sort of the basis of where, and I can relate to my clients because I do energy healing practices myself. And I think that's where I'm uniquely qualified to really encourage them and help them, but also set them up in a way that they have the least amount of risk in offering their services to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important. And I appreciate what you said. It's about empowering practitioners with knowledge so that they're not just reactive or defensive or like this out of fear.
Right.
And by becoming more knowledgeable, they can take the steps that they need. I also love that it's not just about having a lawyer. I love the idea that it's about the risk management, because if we're in practice, there's always risk, right? If you're a practitioner working with another person, and it's about managing and minimizing that. But you know, the audience here, especially in the EFT world, is made up of a combination of both licensed and unlicensed practitioners, whether it's licensed mental health care providers, psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers, etc., even chiropractors, acupuncturists, physical therapists, etc., but also non-licensed practitioners and or coaches, right? So given that we have licensed folk, unlicensed folk, we have different nations. We're in the U.S. here, but we want to, you know, be able to address everybody. And within the U.S., we have 50 different states. This seems a bit overwhelming to be able to start to look at. For example, if we were to just look at scope of practice, right? How does one become, if one has a board, one has a place to go to and look at online. But this makes a challenge being able to understand scope of practice issues. Could you just address some of those and maybe an allegory or maybe just some ways for people to start thinking about that and get more knowledge about it?
Sure. I mean, this is it's a huge topic. It's huge. And I think, let me first address those that are licensed mental health practitioners. We're going to start right there because the groups, each group has a different concern or risk involved in initiating or bringing into their practices with patients something like EFT or some other energy-oriented technique. And I think for licensed mental health care professionals, the biggest risk they face is that even though, you know, there's been a lot of research done on EFT, it's still not fully accepted into the mainstream mental health field. And so licensing boards tend to be very conservative, and the risk is they could be subject to professional discipline for using EFT since it's not considered a traditional psychotherapy technique. And that means basically they would say, well, this falls below the standards of care as defined by the laws and regulations that govern that licensed mental health care professional, or it's outside the scope of practice as legally defined by the statutes and the regulations. So that's the biggest risk that licensed mental health care professionals face. And in the past, I'm well aware of some licensed mental health care professionals being subject to professional discipline by their board specifically for using EFT. In one case, the board said this is an unsubstantiated method. It falls below the standards of care. You cannot use it in your practice, period. Other boards were a little more lenient and said, okay, as long as you make certain disclosures, you can use EFT. Now, these are older cases, and I'm not sure today that that risk is as high as it was when EFT was first being introduced into the mental health care field. Because there is a body of research that's now been published. I know, Craig, you've been very involved in that. You've got your Science of Tapping documentary coming out, and there's been, you know, the ASEP, Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, they have their big research division. So I think the risk is lower, but I still think it exists. And so that's why it's important for licensed mental health care professionals to understand that they can be sued for malpractice if they don't get informed consent, a proper informed consent from their clients, or be subject to professional discipline. So that would be that group. Non-licensed practitioners, EFT practitioners, what they face, and I think this is a huge risk, and it's as big as it has ever been because more people that are not licensed are using EFT in different ways and forms for different kinds of practices. And that is, they can be subject to practicing psychotherapy or medicine without a license. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest risk they face, and it's a crime. So it's a big one. And so again, if you need to tap right now because you're getting into this flood of fear, then I encourage you to do so, because this is the reality. The bottom line is, yes, the playing field is it's not level, okay? But the bottom line is, all of us that do any kind of healing work in the world, all of us are governed by the legal and regulatory framework which governs how the health professions are operated in this country and how healthcare is provided in this country. So that's what I'm trying to educate people about, not to scare you, but to say, okay, these are the risks that are involved, and here's the way you can mitigate your risk if you're a non-licensed practitioner. So that's one group. And then, there's other groups, like, let's say, a physical therapist. Now, physical therapists can use EFT as a method, maybe to help reduce the stress of dealing with a chronic physical problem or pain, because they, under their licensure as PTs, they can help and deal with pain from their patients. So if they brought in EFT to help with that, that would be okay. They're not practicing medicine without a license because they're allowed to use pain. And the same would be for like Craig is a chiropractor. He deals with people's pain, physical pain, based on what's going on with their skeletal system. So I think in that regard, you can bring it into your scope of practice. But again, you just have to be careful that the board, whether it's your chiropractic board, your PT board, doesn't consider EFT below the standards of care or outside the scope of practice. So that all professionals have to deal with that issue. So it depends. But if a PT was using the EFT all of a sudden, using physical therapy, using, EFT or tapping, some kind of emotional disturbance came up, some kind of a memory that was really disturbing. And if the PT started to continue to work with that person, not on the physical pain, but some emotional trauma that came up, that's crossing the line, and that could be practicing psychotherapy without a license. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's tricky, and
it's a real slippery slope.
Before I hand over the next question to
Suzanne. This is a nice segue into the next question, which is a follow on this, which is how a practitioner communicates and markets what they do is an important consideration and could potentially create legal problems for themselves. So can you address some of the common pitfalls that you've witnessed for tapping practitioners with regard to marketing and communication and websites and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's again a big subject, but I want to touch on some really important aspects. One is what people need to know is that the laws that govern all of the licensed healthcare professionals usually have two components. One is the title, what you can use, what you cannot use. They have protected titles. And the second is description of services. So this is where so many practitioners, especially non-licensed practitioners, get themselves into a real legal mess because they don't understand that there's certain words they shouldn't be using. They have to describe their services in a way that doesn't put a red flag over their head, because it's all a matter of perception. How would a licensing board perceive what you're doing as a non-licensed practitioner based on the contents of your website? So one of the things would be like, for instance, what's a safe title? Let's start right. EFT Practitioner.
Practitioner.
That's a safe title. EFT Coach. because the word practitioner and the word coach is not a protected title. But and I've seen this, I've seen people call themselves EFT psychotherapists and they're not licensed. I've seen people call themselves energy psychologists without a license. And these are clear violations of the law. And I know, and these people have gotten cease and desist letters from the licensing board saying, you can't do this, you're in violation of the law. Plus, let's think about how misleading that is to your potential clients. If they think you're some kind of a therapist or a psychotherapist or a psychologist, I mean, that's very misleading and that's highly unethical. So the use of the titles is not only just to be in compliance with the law, but let's really have full disclosure about who we are and what we're offering to our clients. And that's really about being more ethical and being client-centered than worrying about what our titles are and kind of putting ourselves out there as this big woo-woo or something. So I see this over and over again. So the other word you want to avoid is therapist. And therapist per se is not a protected title. However, the perception of the word therapist is you are offering some kind of licensed healthcare services. So again, that's a word that you want to avoid. The other word you want to avoid if you're not a licensed practitioner is that you don't treat clients. You don't have treatments. Because again, those two words, the perception is you're offering some kind of licensed healthcare services. So you want to avoid this. So you have sessions, you work with clients, you have sessions. So it's a word game. It's the nuances of the words. And that's what I do with my clients every day. It's like, this is how I can represent you and have you fully out there, energetically, morphically, everything in terms of what you do and what you want to offer. But let's do it mindfully and let's do it in a way that doesn't put a red flag over your head. And so there's just the nuances of the words. And that also the Federal Trade Commission rules and regulations around that. So description of services, again, if as a general rule, if you're not a licensed mental health care professional, then you need to be aware of what are the DSM-5, the diagnostic statistical methods. Is that it? No, but I just wrote it down. Anyway, the DSM-5,
right.
Diagnostic Manual. It's a manual. Right. So that one describes all of the mental health disorders. So what non-licensed EFT practitioners have to be very careful and mindful of is to not list on their websites that they work with clients or treat clients dealing with anxiety, depression, phobias, PTSDs, because these are all considered mental health care or mental health disorders. So by law, they are prohibited from working with clients with these disorders. As a general rule, there are some exceptions, like the state of Colorado, you can register with the Department of Regulatory Agencies as an unlicensed psychotherapist. And then you would have a lot more kind of elbow room to work with people using EFT with mental health disorders. And again, it's really about making sure that you're representing yourself ethically, and ultimately your scope of practice as a non-licensed and a licensed practitioner is defined by law. It's what are the laws and regulations that apply to you, and each state is different. So you have to, I don't think it's possible for someone who's not skilled in background in law and regulations and the aspects of what it means to be licensed or non-licensed. I really think you need help. That's what I'm here for. Is that it's a slippery slope. Some states you have a little bit more wiggle room if you live in a state with a healthcare freedom law. So it's not black and white. It's a gray area, and it's just something you just really need. You can educate yourself about it, and I certainly have courses and books that do that. But it's also, you really do need help, legal help of some kind, to really set up your practice.
And this also begs the question, of course, it's different for every country, so you would need to check on what is true for your country. Canada is also fairly regulated, and Europe, not so much. Britain is more so, and Australia, New Zealand, and wherever else you might live. So it really behooves you to check all this out, no matter where you live.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's a great point.
And then the other thing I would want to riff on here a little bit is, what if you're working online with people in another state? So what's the
That's
rule
just where I
there?
was going.
Oh, okay.
That's perfect. Yeah. And I wanted to mention that because so many of us that do any kind of energy healing work, I work via distance. It's very common for EFT practitioners, tapping practitioners, maybe wellness or coaching practices of some kind, do work with people across state lines. And so here's the bottom line is that the practitioner is subject to the laws and regulations of the state in which the practitioner resides, but is also subject to the laws and regulations of the state in which the client resides. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you've set your practice up so that as a coach, you can practice anywhere. Coaching, wellness coaching is not a regulated profession, and that allows you to practice in any state and anywhere. So that's what's important, to make sure you're set up so that you're not perceived as offering anything that would require some kind of licensure or regulation. And right now, the practice of EFT itself is not regulated, but in how it's used and for what purposes it can be regulated or cannot be regulated, depending on what it is practitioners wanting to help the client with. If it's like you're a coach and you want to help your clients deal, let's say, for peak performance, maybe they're athletes, or maybe you're working with business folks who want to release negative beliefs about their ability to do public speaking so that they feel more confident about that and therefore they can enhance their careers. There's so many different applications that really are not subject to regulation. So it's really important to know when that line would get crossed. It's like, okay, you're no longer helping someone wanting to release the fear of public speaking, but now we're dealing with a deeper psychological issue, and therefore that's when you need to refer out to someone who can help that person. So I think what I love about, because I looked at the curriculum for this course, the Tapping Out of Trauma, and I think every single EFT practitioner, first non-licensed, licensed, should be required to take this course. Because I think that trauma, again, is one of those tricky words where it has this perception that trauma, you're dealing with some kind of true mental health disorder or some kind of real mental health issue. And though we all know there's big T's and little t's, and we've all been subject to some kind of trauma. So I think for people that want to be highly skilled, really excellent EFT practitioners, this course is absolutely essential for them to sort of recognize when a client, if they're non-licensed, is going into a deeper traumatic experience, and we know this spontaneously can happen. Maybe you're working on, you're tapping on, like for instance, is tapping on someone who wants to not have a fear of public speaking, and as you go through this group of sessions, all of a sudden you're uncovering that the father was physically and verbally abusive at the dinner table when your client wanted to speak up as a young boy. And all of a sudden, that's why he's afraid to speak in public, because he's had this abuse that was sort of uncovered and buried. So you're a non-licensed practitioner and this starts to bubble up. That's when you're shifting from helping them not be afraid to speak in public anymore to all of a sudden you're practicing psychotherapy without a license. That's when the shift should move over to say, I really think that we're getting into some more deeper psychological issues here with this abuse that has surfaced, and I want to be supportive and helpful and honor you. This is not my area of expertise. It's not legally something I can help you with, but I've got a great psychotherapist that I can refer you to, that we can really work with these underlying traumatic memories that you have that are really blocking you from wanting to move forward as a better public speaker. So that's the nuances of how you take care of your clients. And that's the ethical thing to do.
Yeah. There's so many shades of gray with this. Right?
Tons.
And there's
Tons.
so many. For example, just following up on some of the things that I made note of what you said is, for example, the difference between on your website saying you treat PTSD if you're not licensed versus there's research that shows in journals EFT to be effective for PTSD. Right? In other words, you can dictate what printed research has out there. That doesn't say that you're treating it. So,
correct.
And you know, there are ways to work with people's fears without assuming and being careful not to write the word phobia. You know,
Yes.
people can feel grief. They've lost their animal. They've lost a family
Mhm.
member. But if you start putting on your website that you treat depression for loss of a loved one, right? I mean, so many of
Mhm.
these are managing the risk, managing the perception
Right.
of people out there that are coming to your website that you're working with, and shades of gray of when you're drifting too far into a singular traumatic event versus somebody that had years of childhood abuse, right? So, I
Mhm.
mean, these are things we teach in Tapping Out of Trauma,
Right.
but you know, it would be nice to say, look, it's black and white, do this, don't do this. But you know what? It's unique, and we're trying to be their best, do our fiduciary responsibility for what's in the best interest of our clients, and
Yes.
also maintain our practice. Because if something happens to us, we can't help anybody, and we're no good
Mhm.
for, you know,
Mhm.
our family either. So,
Right.
given that, kind of the next question is, I know there are going to be some people that listen to this and say, well, I'm trying to be mindful, and everybody else out there is doing this, and now you're doing this, and I feel paralyzed. I feel like, okay, I can't do anything. Like, I can't ever talk about anything to do with the past. I can't do this. And there's going to
Mhm.
be this balance between I can do what I want and I can't do anything, paralysis. Can you
Mhm.
maybe can you maybe give a balanced perspective for how one would take wherever they're at, no matter what stage they are in practice, and say, how do I begin to find this kind of cautious, mindful awareness presence
Mhm.
and start to move in that direction and adopt an attitude that's useful that way?
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that initially come to me that are in that state. They're very fearful, and they think thinking about the legal issues is like incongruent to being a healer. And you know, there's this paradox that happens. And the other thing that I find too, I hear from people is that they don't want to engage in having a real professional practice because the thought of risk management, ethics, legal issues is just like they go blank because they say, well, I want to just be a healer and I want to help people, and therefore, of course, I'm ethical.
Hmm.
And that is real, and I do see that quite often because, you know, we have the whole gamut of people that are doing EFT and tapping, in that there's the fact is anyone, it's completely unregulated, and some of the perception of EFT out there is that it's the wild west because someone can just read a tutorial or go to a weekend workshop and put themselves out to the public as an EFT practitioner. So I think that to really honor our clients and the people that we want to serve, it's important to understand and to shift from this notion of it's scary to this can be empowering, this can be freeing. And this is the response I get from my clients. I mean, I work with some top people in the field, and one in particular was just really struggling with this. And she had a shift. Once we put these risk management strategies into place into her practice, then all of a sudden she shifted and she said, I should have done this. So I feel so much better. I feel free. I feel empowered. I don't have this dark cloud. So knowledge is power. And that's what I'm here to do. And I've got free articles on my blog you can read. I've got my books, I've got my certificate courses, and I've got my risk management packages. So I think that, you know, it's important also for people to understand that this is a business. And as a business, there are certain components to it. And it's not just all hanging up your shingle and, you know, putting up a website and going, okay, I'm ready and I'm going to heal people. I mean, that's kind of old thinking. It's very naive in my opinion, because when you run a business, there's certain things that you have to just budget for and to think about and to put into place. And that is number one, you have to be properly trained. You go to your training and you get the proper training, and hopefully there'll be a certification question coming up later because I really want to address that.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you've got to put money into your website and your marketing. And third, you have to figure out, okay, into your legal issues and your client agreements, your informed consents, disclaimers for your website, all the risk management strategies you need to do in order to protect yourself and empower your practice and integrity. So these should be just come second place. It's like, these are the steps I need to take to have a highly professional, practice where I'm going to be in full integrity, you need to take a class on ethics and legal issues and risk management strategies for EFT practitioners and have a certificate of completion demonstrating that you have some background and knowledge. You need to take tapping out of trauma and have a certificate of completion, knowing that you've gone through this course material. To me, that it just, once I saw that curriculum, I just was like, oh my gosh, everybody should, it wants to do tapping, needs to go through this and understand this. So I think those are the components, and just to have a mindset of I'm approaching this as a profession, as a practice in which it's a business. And so along with that comes all of these other attributes and things to consider and to put into place.
What other business person would not consider that outside of the healing arts? I don't care if you open up a newspaper stand in the city.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have
Right.
your lease, you're going to have your legal, you're going to have your insurance, you're going to, you know, any other business has that, but in the healing profession, we kind of think that that's not part of it. So thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, this is more from the non-licensed practitioner side, because licensed practitioners, like, hello, they have to go through undergraduate, grad school. I mean, the years that they go through to become licensed, and they're all very well aware of risk management, ethics, legal issues as part of what they have to learn to practice. They have to take ethics courses to maintain their licenses.
Right.
They know they have to have really good informed consents with their patients. So I think, you know, we're building on what's already there from the healthcare field, but putting it into place, the alternative healing arts practitioners is what I call them.
Okay. Suzanne? You're muted, Suzanne. Suzanne, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'm yammering away here and nothing's happening. So Midge, give us an idea of when you think a practitioner should seek legal consultation. Like, is it when they're building their website, or, you know, what I mean, you know, whatever?
The minute they decide to have a practice, actually.
Yeah.
And this happens a lot because people will contact me and they're just getting started. And I'm just like so grateful because, oh, we can set them up just exactly what they need. So a lot of times we'll start just with a client agreement for services. If you're non-licensed, I never do an informed consent agreement, because informed consent agreement means, again, a perception that you're offering some kind of licensed healthcare services. So for my non-licensed clients, we do either a coaching agreement or a client agreement for services that's completely customized to them. Every practitioner is unique. So sometimes we'll start there. Sometimes they already have a website. And so we go, well, because that's where they have their most risk right now. If they have a website up, let's start there, because that's where you have the most exposure. And so we need to like audit the contents of the website. In other words, go through every single line on the website and say, we need to tweak it here because we don't want to use this word, or we're going to redo it sentence this way so that puts a less of a risk on you. And we have to have a disclaimer for your website. Now, the disclaimer is the legal document that governs the relationship between you as the person publishing the information on the website and your services and any visitor to your website. Whereas a client informed consent or a client agreement for services is the legal document that governs the relationship between the practitioner and the one-on-one client that they're seeing. So that's an important distinction right there. Now, for licensed healthcare people, very critical that they get an informed consent that has certain disclosures, and making sure that they can demonstrate that they've talked about, discussed these alternative methods that they are going to offer into their practice, make certain disclosures about them, and so forth and so on. So it's very critical for both non-licensed and licensed practitioners to make sure they have a legally sound either client agreement or informed consent that protects them, because this is what will happen. If a licensing board is unhappy with a particular licensed practitioner, this has happened where a colleague doesn't like what you're doing because they think you're doing this woo-woo thing with people, then they're going to complain to the board, and the board's going to say, what are you doing? And one of the things you can demonstrate to the board that's a risk management tool and strategy, and also reduces your risk of having any further problems with your board, is here's my client informed consent or my patient informed consent agreement that fully discloses all the things that needs to be disclosed, like it's still considered experiential or experimental. It hasn't been fully accepted in the mainstream healthcare yet. This is the theoretical basis of tapping and why we believe it is so effective in working with people around stress and trauma and other mental health disorders. All of this makes you look so much more professional and competent to your board that it's very unlikely that at that point in time, you're going to have continuing problems with your board. And the other piece is on that, because we're kind of a little bit off on a tangent, is you have to be able to demonstrate to your board that you are fully competent and trained in EFT if you're using it with patients in a licensed profession. Mm-hmm. So there's that piece as well. So, and a lot of, a lot of mental health care people do have websites, and they have to make sure they're following the advertising rules and the use of their materials and what they're offering to the public. So they also need audits of their websites. Very different kind of website audit than from a non-licensed practitioner, right, but also critical for them in the disclaimers as well. Because sometimes the laws and regulations that govern in some states, you can't, for instance, you can't use testimonials on your website. And some people don't realize that are licensed in that state. So I go through all the laws and regulations that apply to that particular practitioner, and making sure that all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, so that the board can't say, well, you did not get proper informed consent to use this with your client. Especially if you only did a weekend workshop, you got excited about using tapping, and then you started using it with your patients. That's not an ethical way to proceed, and that's where you can get subject to professional discipline. So that's critical as well. So really all the way along, when you start, if you're in the middle, some people then start to go out there and want to teach workshops to the public. That's a different type of legal document. It's a release and participation agreement. And the other thing I'm doing with a lot of my licensed people are moving towards, a lot of them have been psychotherapists for years, and they're really wanting to branch out, and they don't want to be only practicing psychotherapy within the state which they're licensed. That's the only place they can do that. So separate coaching practices, so that they can work with people all over the country, as long as we make it very, very clear that they do not offer any kind of psychotherapy with their coaching clients, make a distinction to what is coaching, which is psychotherapy, making sure it's very, very clear that even though they are a licensed psychotherapist in the state of Virginia, in their coaching practice, they do not diagnose, treat, or handle mental health care disorders. All they work with is coaching and describing, maybe lifestyle or wellness, or there's so many different applications. Mm-hmm. And that's one way for those folks to branch out, and it gives them something new and fun to do, and they really are enjoying the ability to do that and become coaches instead of psychotherapists. And that's another way for them to move forward and expand what they're doing. And that's a whole different business. And so you have to keep it separate bank accounts. I prefer separate websites. Sometimes people will combine them, but we make it really clear, 2 separate practices, so they're not combined.
Thank you. You read my mind on that one, or my notes. And 2 things that came up for me on that before the certification piece is, one is that we often tell, disclosure here, I refer a lot of our students to Midge for exactly this. And we say sometimes they're overwhelmed by finances and other things. And I say, just like you want to start saying, you set a certain amount of money for savings, a certain amount for marketing, a certain amount for legal, build it up to here, do that next level of review or audit. Then, so in other words, ideally you get everything done up front, but I know not everybody does. So it's a perpetual improvement of the practice and a perpetual managing of risk. And what I want to say, almost on not an energetic and psychological level, is the freedom that comes to one of the biggest things that we see in early practitioners with their business are fears of putting themselves out there. And I tell practitioners, if you can't shout to the world what you're doing with your practice, either one, there's a lot of issues to tap on there, or 2, it's because you're scared to say things or have people see things that maybe you don't feel solid about. So by going through this process, I remember even as a chiropractor, the first time I went through informed consent, I was scared to say, here's a risk for this and here's a risk for that. And being on the fearful side transmits a whole other feeling than, here's what I do, here's what I don't do. If you need this, that's not me. If you need this, I can help you with that. And the kind of clarity that comes with those boundaries projects confidence, projects freedom, and has you just sleep better at night. So thank you, because you're saying all of these in different ways. But
exactly. Yeah, Thank you.
When you're talking about the skill training, let's talk about certification, because obviously if you're not a licensed person that has a board that manages your practice, then you still are out there without having a board managing you. And so given practitioners that are not licensed and also licensed practitioners, let's talk about the value or the importance of certification. Is it required? Since there's not a law that says you have to have a certification to practice EFT. Could you talk about the issues with that?
I like to approach it as a risk management strategy, because again, anyone can call themselves an EFT tapping practitioner. So as a risk management strategy, and if you really want to be a professional practitioner, the only way you can do that, in my opinion, is to become certified, because you can't be licensed. That's not possible. Right. So the only way that you can bring some credibility and credentials to yourself as an EFT practitioner is to become certified. It's a risk management strategy because it really does help you reduce your risk of being considered a lone wolf out there. And it presents you in a much higher level of professionalism, but all certification programs are not equal. So I like to sort of give a list of what I think are, and if you're going to have a highly professional and with a certification program that's with a lot of integrity, there's some basic components I think you need to be aware of. If you're out there starting looking, wanting to enhance yourself or a certified practitioner, and that is you really need to get trained. And you know, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I think that needs to be in person. I really think you need to attend you know, workshops, trainings, and get you know, work one-on-one in a physical space with people. I know some organizations are now offering this type of training online, and I think it probably can be effective. It's just my personal preference is for a live, you know, interaction and live workshop. And the other thing is you have to practice, and so you need to have, you know, practice clients. And that's a whole, you know, maybe 60 case reports or case studies. There's different ways that you can describe that. But, you know, you do write-ups. Say, I did this and this and this, and I've taken this, and this is what's been happening. So you get a body of work and you have an opportunity to work one-on-one with people, because that's the essence of becoming a practitioner, is being able to build that rapport, have a beautiful informed consent process, build trust, because that's going to create the opportunity for real healing to happen. In fact, that rapport and trust is more important than the specific technique that you may use with a particular client. So I think it's, you know, getting in there and really learning how to do it, working one-on-one with someone. I think you need to do your own personal healing work as well. I know Barbara Brennan's, her school is a 4-year program, and part of the yearly requirements, besides, you know, doing a lot of practice sessions with people and writing them up and being observed and, you know, getting feedback, is that you have to do so many hours of your own personal healing work. And I think that's critical. I think it's a really important component of a certification program. And then someone with the knowledge and skill has to observe you working one-on-one to see if you really know what you're doing. You can send in a bunch of case studies and, you know, reports. Maybe 60 would be a good number. But how do you know, especially for the person who's going to certify them or the organization that's going to certify them, that they really, you've seen them actually in action working with someone one-on-one? So critical. And this can be done, you know, you can film a session and have someone, you know, your mentor watch that and give you feedback and fine-tune your skills and say, this is where you could use a little more help, or this was really well done, so that you have a comfort level of working one-on-one with the client. Because the bottom line is, it's about them. Right. It's about, we need to be highly ethical, highly skilled, highly trained, so that we keep a client-centered practice all the time. And so that's one way to do it, is to have that feedback. And of course, anyone who's licensed, especially in the mental health care field, they have hours and hours of supervision before they get to be licensed. So again, I think this is an important component in these certification programs, because it's really important for the mentor to say, okay, this person really knows what they're doing with someone. And then again, continuing education. I think every practitioner should take a course on ethics and legal issues and risk management, and I do have one for EFT practitioners. I'm just updating it right now. Again, I'm going to say it again. I'm not getting paid for an endorsement here, but I really believe that every EFT practitioner should take the tapping out of trauma training. It's just, to me, it's so essential to being a really high skilled practitioner. And so, and you have to have, again, your legal documents and making sure that you are practicing and having a solid practice. It's setting a foundation, a real solid foundation, so that you can go out in the world and do your work. And so for licensed practitioners, critical you become certified within this type of framework. So in other words, a certification program that says, okay.
Please explain why, because we've trained many licensed people. They say, I've already got way bigger diplomas from bigger institutions that took longer times and their PhDs, MA, right? I mean, all of those. So why would they need a piece of paper certificate?
Because it protects their license. It can help protect their license. It's really that simple. First of all, I mean, I think sometimes there's ego involved in some of the licensed people, and so, well, I can just go and take a weekend workshop and I'll be fine. I can use EFT in my practice. And I think that, I don't agree. First of all, it's really important to become certified, because if they were ever questioned by their licensing board, or they had a client that got unhappy, or had a family member that was unhappy, they were using this weird tapping thing with their loved one, then the board's going to say, what is your training and background in EFT and tapping? And if they say, well, I attended a conference, I read a book, they're going to look really bad. Because what the board's going to want to see is that you've been fully trained and are competent in EFT, and how you demonstrate that to the board is by being certified. It's a critical risk management strategy to be certified if you're licensed. It helps protect your license, and it's just really critical that you also, in terms of when you're working with your patients, that you're going to look better to them, and they're going to feel more comfortable knowing that you've been fully trained and are competent in EFT. And I think the only way you can do that is becoming certified.
Great. Thank you so much, Midge.
Well, and not only that, but also ethically, you don't want to do harm. And and if you don't really know what you're doing with EFT or any other energy form of energy work, then you can do harm.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
it's about having clients in it. Yeah.
So, Midge, I think you've really demonstrated for us here that it is possible to balance having a heart-centered service to clients and taking the steps that are important to do this, both ethically and professionally as a business. And with it's really wonderful that that's possible, and we really appreciate your demonstrating how that's possible. And I guess just lastly, we wanted to know if there's any other tips that might be helpful that you would like to share with us.
Well, I think we covered quite a few. I mean, I think it's really important to become certified. It's a risk management strategy to, get some training and background in ethics, to make sure you have had an audit of your website and you're not misrepresenting your credentials. You have to be aware of the Federal Trade Commission rules and regulations around how you advertise your services. We really didn't talk about that today. But again, it's really important.
Can you speak to that for just a moment? I mean, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's important, because another thing on the website, a lot of EFT practitioner, energy-oriented practitioners do is they have testimonials and on their websites, and they make unsubstantiated claims about what happens when they use these techniques. And what's important to understand is that the Federal Trade Commission is the federal regulatory agency that governs the use of how we advertise our services and our products to the public. So they're really looking at misleading, deceptive, or fraudulent practices that harm the consumer. And many states have consumer protection acts as well. So this is another part of the law that practitioners need to be aware of. And the FTC is specifically targeting new therapies because they feel they're not substantiated. And so one of the main issues and what happens with testimonials is that the testimonial can say something like, oh, I went to see Susie, we used EFT, and I no longer suffer from insomnia. Okay, that testimonial, first of all, it's a false claim because under FTC rules and regulations, you have to have valid scientific proof for any claim you make about any healthcare product or service. So you've already violated the FTC rules and regulations on that score. And then by saying that by using Susie using EFT with her client, that cured her insomnia. So first of all, insomnia is a medical condition. So then now Susie's like, okay, she could be charged with practicing medicine without a license because she's not a medical doctor. So that's why testimonials and claims on website can be very, very problematic. So that's what the audit's also about. It's not just about the contents, about how you describe your services, but it also covers testimonials. And some people say, well, my client can say whatever they want because, you know, it's First Amendment right?
No.
So yes, to your point, but once that client statement is a testimonial, it becomes a form of advertising. And as an advertisement, it's subject to the FTC rules and regulations. So again, that's why auditing is so critical, because we cover not only just, you know, the contents of the website, but also go over testimonials and claims that may be made that would get you into trouble. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So that's another important part with why marketing is critical in terms of where you can be vulnerable and not even be aware of it. So it's important to make sure that that piece gets covered.
Right, and it's an easily accessible piece to anybody that has any investigative need to check you out. They go to their website. It's easy. It's not even a personal conversation. And I think that that's really critical, because I've seen many practitioners say, but everybody does it. Everybody has those. What do you mean I can't do that? And that's like saying, that's like saying all my friends do it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would say at least 95% of the websites out there with non-licensed EFT practitioners are in violation of the law. They just don't know any better.
Right.
You know, and so do you want to be the first one? And people do get clobbered. I mean,
right.
There was just someone who called themselves an energy psychologist, non-licensed, got a cease and desist letter from the board. A personal friend of mine said she used energy psychology techniques on her website. She was a spiritual counselor. And here in Oregon, when she got a letter from the board saying you cannot use the word psychology or say you do energy psychology with people, that's the practice of psychology without a license. Mm-hmm. Even the word counselor is very tricky, because in some states, in Oregon, you can call yourself like a spiritual counselor. It's okay. You're not violating the law. But in New Jersey, for instance, only licensed mental health care professionals can use the title of counselor. So when I work with my clients, I says, let's not use the word counselor, because almost everybody I work with who's non-licensed wants to work with anyone in the United States. And licensing boards will come after you. I mean, there was a person in, I think he was in Alabama or someplace like that, and he was, had type 2 diabetes. He started a paleo diet because Western medicine was not helping him. And he, quote, no longer has diabetes, and he started a blog, and then all of a sudden people got interested, and then he started giving nutrition advice and seeing clients via distance. He got a letter from the North Carolina Board of Nutrition, and he got a cease and desist letter saying you're practicing nutrition without a license, and they shut him down. He can certainly write articles and share information, but he can't see clients. And that's another thing with EFT practitioners. I work with a lot of them who use EFT for weight management or overall wellness and health, and then they bring in a nutrition component. You have to be extremely careful. Some states you have to be a licensed nutritionist or a registered dietitian to offer any kind of nutritional advice or services. So again, it's a slippery slope. It's just important to know what the laws and regulations are so that you can be empowered and feel good about going out there and having a practice and helping people. And the bottom line is, as I said earlier, all of us have to work within the current regulatory and legal framework that governs all of us that want to help people out there with their healthcare needs.
Yeah. And you know, I wouldn't do my own tax returns. I mean, it's complicated enough. There, you know, I know this much, but I know there's this much.
Yeah.
And, you know, the idea of me trying to know that and cover all that would be stupid for me to do that. So I know that for me to be able to sleep at night, I need an accountant and a CPA to do my taxes. I'm not going to try to know all the legalities of what it's like to be in practice. So I just want to honor that role that you play for our business, for many of our students that we refer, for the the education that you do, the books. I reread You're Practicing with Integrity for a second time recently and swear it was the first time I read it. There were so many new pieces. I was just, it was really fabulous. So I just want to give a plug to, your website is easy. It's midgemurphy.com. So it's even pretty hard to misspell that. So midgemurphy.com, and on there they can find out, they can get your newsletter, they can find out about your books, your certification courses, your risk management, all of the things there. I want to thank you for all your contributing to the profession. It's been I'm sure this will stir things up in conversations, and I hope that people will make posts. We'll have the Q and answer, the Q&A below, so hopefully it'll raise questions. And this is really the way that we give a beginning to the next wave of tapping out of trauma, because we only give it twice a year. And it'll be starting this time on March 8th.
Excellent.
It is an online course, but it's an online course for people who have already taken live in-person EFT level 1 and 2 trainings as a prerequisite. And that way we can go deeper between live Q&A, online, and a variety of mixed ways that we educate that way. So,
and I think also, Greg, I also wanted people to know I offer free 15-minute consultations.
Oh, beautiful. Of course you do.
It's really easy to send me an email. We set up a time to chat, to talk about your particular unique needs, whether you're licensed or non-licensed, where it is you want to go, where are you in your practice. Great. And so these free consultations are my way to connect with you and give you some information, and also make you aware of how I can be of service to you.
Great. Perfect. Thank you for that. And Suzanne, any final thoughts from you before we close out?
Just loving Midge and thanking her also for all her wonderful work. Really, personally, it's been great for both Craig and I, not only in terms of our course here, Tapping Out of Trauma, but our individual practices. And just, as you said, it allows you to be heart-centered because you've dealt with all the risk management pieces.
Exactly.
So we can't emphasize that enough, folks. You definitely should deal with this.
Right. Thank you.
And not sort of go, and go into brain fog.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? So,
not a good strategy.
Not a good strategy.
Anyway, so blessings. Thank you.
Blessings,
just want to thank everybody that's tuning in and listened and watched and enjoyed this. And we hope that it was useful for you. Yeah. Practice well, practice ethically, practice with heart, and protect yourself. It helps to maintain a practice, and practicing that protects your clients as well. So everybody wins. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, from Tapping Out of Trauma.